This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week, Shawn Powers and Aaron Newcomb are joining me to talk about education, especially higher education, as it pertains to the open source world and how you can learn what you need to know in tech and make yourself employable. Do you need college for that or not? Or what's college actually good for anymore? Wide open discussion about that and about surveillance and what's going on in law enforcement right now, where they're doing good things to catch criminals, but maybe bad things in respect to privacy. And how do we reconcile all that? That's all coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 633, recorded Wednesday, June 9th, 2021. Open source education and privacy. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden. Get the password manager that offers a robust and cost-effective solution that can drastically increase your chances of staying safe online. Get started with a free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or try it for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. Hello again, and greetings to everyone everywhere. This is Floss Weekly, and I am Doc Searls. Today, one head in a three-headed, not really a monster, which is Shawn, as in brain of Shawn Powers, and Aaron Newcomb, who should become visible for those of you watching very shortly. There they are. They've appeared on by either of my ears, and those of you listening will just have to imagine that. So we'll start with Shawn. So you're still back at home in Michigan with your frying pan hanging on the wall?
It's true. Yeah, it's a rubber frying. It's a rubber frying pan. I don't know if that makes it cooler or less cool, but it's yeah.
Don't cook with it.
I'm still, yeah, exactly. I'm still here in Michigan. Nothing has changed. I'm in the same office. This isn't a false background. This is just where I exist constantly.
And Aaron, where are you, dude?
Yeah, I'm just chilling in California here. In my little workshop.
You can make your fake background work better than I can. I tried a fake background for a moment there. I'm actually in New York City at our New York apartment, which we abandoned for over a year while other people lived in it and didn't, meaning that everything was stale when we got back. And over there are 10 hard drives hooked up to 7 ports in a USB hub that can't see all of them, and I've been trying to figure it all out since then. It's one of the many things we're debugging. In fact, this weekend, went to see the grandkids in Baltimore, had to get AAA to come and give me a new battery, and then on the way down, the air conditioning leaked all over, made a pool of water at my wife's feet, and then and somebody had to get out and reattach the battery terminal every time we stopped the car, and had to have those fixed in Baltimore. In order to limp back. That's what happens when you leave things for a year. Yeah, living the dream. So this morning we're going to get into hopefully durable enough news that anybody can listen to this at any point in the future, but is still current right now. And you guys have some queued up, as do I. But first, I have to let you all know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden. What is the easiest way for businesses and individuals to store, share, and sync sensitive data? Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the only open source cross-platform password manager that can be used at home, on the go, or at work, and is trusted by millions of individuals, teams, and organizations worldwide. Businesses need to empower employees to follow password management best practices. By giving your employees Bitwarden, they can securely store credentials across personal and business worlds. Every Bitwarden account begins with the creation of a personal vault. Use Bitwarden for your business. When an individual joins a team or company, they can be assigned to the organizational vault for access to shared credentials. Quicker access means quicker productivity. It's fully customizable. Add features using enterprise policies to adapt to your business needs. Bitwarden also just released a few new features, including Bitwarden Send, a fully encrypted method to transmit sensitive information, whether text or files, directly to anyone. Team members can generate unique and secure passwords for every site and ensure passwords are not used more than once. You'll minimize the risk of using weak and vulnerable passwords. You'll get enterprise-grade security. Bitwarden conducts third-party security audits and is compliant with major privacy and security standards, GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, and SOC 2. Unite your existing systems with Bitwarden using SSO authentication, directory services, or powerful APIs in a fully featured command line interface. Their end-to-end encrypted vault helps mitigate phishing attacks by storing passwords and more. Interested in a business plan? Bitwarden has plans for all sizes. Their Teams organization is $3 a month per user, where you can share private data securely with your coworkers, department, or entire organization. This plan also has full management of user groups. For enterprises, use Bitwarden's Enterprise Organization Plan for just $5 per month per user. Store business secrets securely and enable enterprise policies, SSO authentication, and an option to self-host. Want to learn how Bitwarden organizations work? Check out their free organization plan. It includes 2 users who can store and share secure passwords. Bitwarden believes that everyone should have access to basic password security tools. Individuals can use their basic free account forever for an unlimited number of passwords across any number of devices, or upgrade any time to their premium account for less than $1 a month, giving you premium password security and management features. And if you're looking for secure password storage for your entire family, their family organization option gives up to 6 users premium features for only $3.33 a month. Using Bitwarden Cloud, you can get started in no time or self-host if preferred. Monitor and manage security vulnerabilities using the Bitwarden Vault Health Reports. Identify exposed, reused, weak, or potentially compromised passwords, as well as any items in your vault with inactive two-factor authentication, 2FA. Get started with a free Teams or Enterprise trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan at bitwarden.com/twit, or try it for free across devices as an individual user. That's bitwarden.com/twit. Okay, team. Speaking of teams, here's Aaron and Shawn. And we're talking news, but I kind of like the way that the show can be listened to a year or two in the future without feeling like, oh my God, that's so 2021. I don't want to hear that. So what do you got there, Shawn?
Well, that could not have been a more perfect intro because I'm talking about, it's an article actually I wrote, which maybe is cheating, but it's about graduation season, right? This is the time of year, at least here in the U.S. I'm not sure it's the same everywhere, but graduation season is here. And one of the questions that I get every year a lot is, if you're going into tech, should you go into college, or should you focus on certifications, or should you try to get an entry-level job, or should you be an intern? And the resounding question is maybe to all of those. And so I was really interested in this group's take on if there is one solution that you think is best. Like, is college, is like a 4-year university the best way to get into technology? Is that the worst way? I have my own opinions that are in the article, but I don't want to kind of taint the water here with my opinions first. So I'm curious, Doc and Aaron, do you have thoughts on college versus things like certifications?
Yeah, I certainly do. I don't know.
Yes, both of you are so excited.
I am. I think about this a lot, actually. I have kids that are this age. My son just graduated last weekend. Is that right? Could it be last weekend already? No, 2 weekends ago. He's going off and he has a great job to go to. He was an intern. But I often talk to, especially high schoolers that are worried about, what do I do? Do I go to college? It seems like the only option, or they feel pressured to go to college. I do think college is a great experience for kids, talking about just the experience of going to college and meeting new people and all that kind of stuff. In terms of getting a job, though, the college experience definitely is not for everyone. And there are plenty of examples that we can look to in the past of people that did not either go or did not finish college and have gone on to be some of the richest people in the world, and very successful as well. So I think that there's plenty of examples out there kind of on both sides. And I think it really depends on the individual. And the problem is when you're that old, trying to figure this out in many cases, you just don't know, right? I mean, you don't know. Am I the college type, or am I the 2-year program type, or do I do a 6-month programming school, right? And go that route. You just don't know at that point, and that's what makes it so difficult for so many people.
I should preface to. Oh, go ahead, Doc. But
okay. Well, go ahead and preface.
I was going to say that I should preface this with, I've been a technology trainer for over a decade, making video courses for folks to get certified in like LPIC and Linux Plus and other CompTIA stuff. So, I kind of have that mentality that this is definitely a good way to go. That said, I went to university for 2 years. I went to a community college for a year, and I have no degree at all. I urge you to read the article. I mean, it goes into more depth than I will here. But I'm not anti-college, and you'd think that somebody who spent the bulk of his career doing an alternative way to, get into the workforce, you'd think that I would be very, if not anti-college, at least pro other options. But I still think there's a valid use case for college. And community college in particular is possibly an affordable way to actually get some of the benefits of college without getting $100,000 into debt. But Doc, I'm curious on your take too. Obviously I'm excited about it. It's my topic. So
I have many takes. One is that, I come from a family that valued higher education a great deal, and in part because some of us never, my father's side, nobody ever went because they were too poor. Or just lower class, or working class, I should say. They all worked. And on my mother's side, she and all of her sibs went to college, and they were, Swedish immigrants, kids from the prairie. And college was everything. You had to get to college. But now, I mean, when I went back when I was at Linux Journal, I used to speak to groups. I'd go to a Linux users group, a lug somewhere, and ask, how many people here learned Linux in college, or learned what they're doing with code in college or in school? And almost all the way across the board, the answer was none. But that's for one specific group of people. Certainly with kernel hackers, that was the case too. But that said, all 4 of my kids went to college, and one of them is now the chair of her department. It's the theater department, and going to college and doing theater in college, if theater is going to be your profession or something you really want to do with your life, that matters. Our youngest kid, who just got out in 2019 from college, he was a theater and economics major, and econ is what he's leveraging right now. It's not theater. He was a great actor and a really good performer, but he's not doing that now, in part because, as he puts it, that particular fire is not in his belly. And he wouldn't want to compete in New York City, which is where he lives. And he has a good job right now that can leverage what he learned in econ. But my own feeling about an awful lot of school, I wouldn't even start with college. I think an awful lot of what we learn in school, not so much what we don't learn in school. I think school is about normalizing people. It's about the bell curve. It's not about what enables all of our inherent genius. One of my favorite writers is John Taylor Gatto, who's written many books on the topic, and he had one of them called Dumbing Us Down, and which is basically about, he was the most awarded teacher in the history of New York State, something like that. And he said when he quit after 25 years of winning awards, he said, here, I teach 6 lessons. I teach provisional self-esteem, class position, that you can't hide, submission to authority, the unrelatedness of all things. I'm in civics class, now I'm in gym, now I'm in math, and when in the world is much different than that. And that most kids, in fact, are very interested in what the adults are doing and learn a lot from the adults and from the older kids. And why are we even putting kids of all of one age in a class together when in all of civilization, through most of it, we learned from our elders? Older kids could teach younger kids. My mother was a teacher, and she said the best schoolhouse she ever taught in was a one-room schoolhouse in North Dakota, because she could feed the information to the oldest kids and it would filter its way down. I think that, and as for colleges themselves, and I've had affiliations now with 5 universities that never would have let me in, as a student, but those universities especially are medieval institutions. Extreme. I mean, gills, robes, all that stuff is not especially practical and not especially oriented to being, making the most complete selves we can of what we bring uniquely to the world. All of us are different for a reason. We all look different. We all sound different. We're all learning constantly. We're basically learning animals. And speaking of learning, I mean, you want to see people who learn fast, find the homeless. I mean, when you're in a tough spot, you can learn improvisation pretty damn fast. And it's anyway. But I don't have complete. My thoughts are not complete about that. I love college too. I enjoyed being there.
You brought up a good point.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, the question is, has this? I'm going to go. You be quiet, Shawn. I'm going to go now. So the question is, has this paradigm changed since the internet, which was created in large part at universities, ironically, as we're talking about this, right? But has the paradigm changed where now there is more access to learning and knowledge? So maybe this has changed in the last 30 years or so.
I think it's changed in the last 30 years, but also in the last year, the need for utilizing the internet for teaching, not always for the best. I'm not saying that, the online teaching is the way of the future, but it's forced us to connect in ways and learn in ways that we haven't before. Doc, I just want to, you brought up a really interesting point, like a couple of your kids who went to university for economics and theater and stuff. I think that there are still some very valid cases for university. Specifically tech is where I'm not sure that a university degree is going to land you that job that you are going to need to pay off the debt for it, if you will. Because universities inherently are behind. I mean, you mentioned that they're archaic. I remember your terminology was more clever than that. But even with the, modern colleges have a better technology program than they did 1,000 years ago when I was in college, but it still lags behind what you need to be able to do to get a job in the world right now. I think even if you get your college degree, I mean, they're not just teaching C++ program. They're actually teaching languages that you might actually use, but you're still going to have to play catch up after graduation, doing things, either getting certifications or at least following that training for certification to get up to speed to be employable. I think the college offers other things that are good. Aaron, you mentioned that the experience itself is beneficial, and I completely agree. In fact, I was going to be an electrical engineer, and then it turns out that they did things with numbers in Calculus 3 that I didn't think ever needed to be done. So I'm very grateful that I went to college because I knew what I didn't want to do, and I didn't know that going in. So I think there are some benefits. It's just so expensive that I worry about, money spent and debt and, is it a wise choice? That sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Well, look at, the cost is ridiculous. I mean, when my older kids who are now around 50 went to college in California, going to a UC, a University of California, one of the state schools, the community colleges were $0, I think, and to go to a state school to a university of the state was like $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, something like that. This is in the late 80s. And now it's just as expensive pretty much as in-state tuition is $30,000, $35,000, something like that. I'm sure there are reasons for that, but it was, our youngest kid ended up getting half a ride at a private school somewhere else because it was about the same price as going to a UC. He got into a bunch of UCs, but didn't go because why not go to some other place? I think it's important that we not generalize about everything, right? I mean, there are a zillion colleges and universities. They're all very different. There are a lot of ambitions one can have and one can leverage in a school. There are some that are not expensive, and I think an important point especially for our listenership and viewership is that tech jobs are in great demand, and maybe the right college or the right school or just learning from Shawn is the thing to do for those jobs. Not sure.
Yeah, I think I can speak from my experience. I mean, I've worked for a number of large companies and a number of small companies throughout my career, and I can tell you that the smaller companies and even the larger companies that I work for have started to change their hiring hiring practices, especially when it comes to software engineers. One company I looked at, we worked with one of the local trade schools, for lack of a better term. It was one of those 6-month programs or 3-month programs. I can't remember. And we got a ton of great people from there. And the reason we like to work with them is because their programs, they had to actually do practical work for. So it wasn't just learning the languages and everything else. They built their own applications and learned how to work in a group, like, emulating a DevOps experience, for example. And so when we hired them, they had the necessary skills that we needed. We didn't really care if they had a lot of the humanities, those required classes and stuff like that. So I can definitely say that I think things are changing, at least for the companies that I've worked for. And even for Google, I mean, they used to be very focused on grade point average and which school did you go to. But now it seems like they've even eased off those requirements over the past 3 or 4 years in their hiring practices, and they're now looking for, hey, what have you done? What have you actually done? That's way more important.
That's encouraging, because one of the frustrating things is with the hiring process now, a lot of times you can't get through the automated AI part of the hiring process if you don't have a degree. A lot of times that's the filter. And that's frustrating, because I get it, right? I mean, it's a viable filter. Are people willing to put in the time and the effort, and have they, done the commitment? But you lose a lot of people who don't want to, who are smart enough, then they don't want to go into that much debt, whatever their situation might be. So it's good to hear that possibly companies aren't using that as their litmus test for if you even get an interview, because that's one of the things that college can do sometimes, is get you in the door. Even if your degree doesn't have anything to do with technology, having that degree sometimes will get you in the door, and that's frustrating.
Yep.
Doc, you muted. That's what I get for coughing. I was muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, so there's a paucity right now of Linux talent. And I'm wondering if anybody recruiting for Linux talent starts with a college degree. I have a feeling they don't, but I don't know. I should ask one of my sons who is in the recruiting business. he could probably come on the show and educate us.
It'd be valid, because that's the thing. You want to land the good job that you love, and that, allows you to live indoors and all of those things. And getting to the point, I think if you can get to the point where you have an interview with a human being, you're going to be able to better communicate what you can do and be clear about what you can't do, but how you're willing to learn those things. And I have lots of stories about, how to interview well, but getting that interview, that's the challenge sometimes. And I don't have a great solution to that, to be honest.
Yeah, the shared story is this one in Linux Insider: lack of qualified Linux talent impedes enterprise move to the clouds. A question I have, it may be a pivot to another point, but why does everybody have to go to the clouds? I'm wondering, is it just like an absolute requirement at this point? It's just that clouds are just so much better. They're better positioned on the internet. You can do more with them. I'm not even sure.
Money. That's
money.
The short answer.
Really?
Money.
Yeah.
You buy what you need. You don't have to fill up a data center and then hire staff to manage the data center. You just carve out a chunk of what you need, and you pay the amount, and you don't worry about what's happening. But all of those services are running Linux. So if you want to have somebody who can successfully troubleshoot and come up with creative solutions, you need somebody who knows what's actually happening. And I think that's where that article is getting at. There are people who can fill in the blanks and who can click checkboxes, but you need somebody who knows what's actually happening, so that when something goes wrong, they can troubleshoot. And that's where I think Linux talent is is still vital, even in a world that is run with APIs and checkboxes. We still need people who know what's happening behind the scenes.
It would be interesting to hear from people on this one. You know, on how the people advance their own careers, the people in the FLOSS world, because it is a world, and we have thousands of listeners and viewers, and I'd like to hear more about that. How did you get?
I will tell you, Doc, that there's the same old thing that you and I and everybody has gone back to on this show, is, you know, find a project and contribute to it in whatever way you can, and that's how you get forward. I can think of, as you asked that question, I can think of a handful of people just off the top of my head that jumped into a project. I can think of one guy that jumped into the Prometheus project, for example, and I don't know what his degree was. It didn't really matter, because the reason that he was successful is because he jumped in and contributed to that project in a very meaningful way and advanced that project and created features that people wanted. And that's how it worked. And the nice thing is the open source projects, the open source community is very welcoming. I think it's at the end where, you know, they say, hey, just come contribute to the project, you know, contribute some, go to the GitHub page and fix something, fix an issue. And they don't care. They don't ask, hey, you can't fix that issue before you get your degree, or they don't even ask, you can't fix that issue before you get a certification, right? There's no interview process. You just jump in and start working, and you can really make a big difference.
In the article, I pointed out that documentation is a great first step into participating too, because every project needs documentation. Every project needs documentation. Yep. Every project needs documentation.
Yeah. I remember when I started at Linux Journal, and somebody was saying, the man pages for that one suck. Somebody improve the man pages for that. You know, they're, you know, we need these things. I was, oh boy, I just had a thought a second ago about, doesn't matter. I'm in New York City, and so I'm wondering, I'm hearing the noise outside my window and hoping it's not interfering, but that's life in the big city. So, I mean, it's about career advancement. There's, I'm thinking it's so easy to prove yourself in open source, you know, and it isn't like we heard that guy did something good. It's like your signature's almost on something. I almost wonder if we need open source battle ribbons you can kind of wear into the interview. You know, I could, you know, one for each particular project, except GitHub has like 5 million of them, and you can't, there aren't that many different potential merit badges, but we might want to formalize it in some way. Just an open source thought about it.
Interesting. Community badges. Something to. Huh. I have to think about that one. That could be pretty interesting. I mean, you could have a documentation badge, for example. That's your first. It's like the Boy Scouts or something. You know, that's the first badge you get is the documentation badge, because that's where you start. And then, that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah,
maybe GitHub should pick up on that.
If Randall Munroe is listening, it could show up in an XKCD cartoon shortly. And there's another cartoonist I know who could put it in his cartoons.
Speaking of GitHub, just throwing it out there, that's one more thing before we move on to the next topic is I know that several of the employers that I have worked for, going back to looking at what you do, not where you went to school, several of them have looked at GitHub. They will ask you for your GitHub profile. They will look at it and see how many contributions you've made. So, you know, that is more of a marker, as it were, for a lot of new companies these days than where you went to school or what your degree was. So get out there and do something.
Open source can really help.
I'm thinking too. Go ahead.
I was giving you a segue there, Doc. Open source into one of the next topics. That was my segue.
It's always beneficial. It helps everybody.
My light.
I'm thinking that that somebody in the back channel is saying lack of critical thinking skills is a huge problem, even amongst those in tech. And that's something you can learn in college. But I was also thinking, if you have critical thinking skills, you want to complete whatever it is you're working on GitHub and not leave a bunch of abandoned stuff? I'm just kind of thinking out loud there. I mean, I'm wondering if I've done almost nothing at GitHub, so I'm not a good one to talk to about that. But I'm wondering, if one can leave a bad trail there. Can one? I don't even know.
I mean, maybe 20 projects that just have a readme.md in them and nothing else.
Yeah.
But
that's what I was thinking. Mostly what people are going to look for are there are, ratings. If you look at somebody's profile or their projects, the repositories that they've created, there are markers there that you can see. I've used this to judge the popularity of different open source projects in the past, where I go to GitHub, I look at the number of stars, which aren't really indicative because those can be spoofed. But, how many stars did your project have? How many forks does it have? How many issues does it have? How many polls does it have? It's about the level of activity around the project. I'm not saying you can't have a good project that is put out there once and is just great and nobody has to change it ever. But it's unlikely, right? So if you're looking for a developer that is both contributing code and fostering a group of people to help develop that code, looking at the number of issues and the number of contributions that they've made is actually a pretty good indicator on GitHub, in my opinion.
So a segue here. I don't think it actually is a segue, but it's looking at another side of things, which is unintended consequences in the world. Maybe not of your own career, choices, but there will certainly be those. But I mean, if you've chosen a career in either law enforcement or law breaking, there's an interesting object lesson in today's news. Actually, the FBI could have created an app, an encrypted messaging app called ANOM, which is kind of like a play on anonymous, that it's seeded into the world, and it turned into, the whole idea was entrapment. It was all about an entrapment. It was a sting. They expected criminals to use it. Criminals did, and they rounded up a bunch of them in the U.S. and Australia and maybe other places. And but it raises all kinds of questions, like are the ones we trust right now, say Signal or Telegram or some other encrypted messaging service, can we trust them? How do we know? How do we know that we're not being watched? Was that the right thing for them to have done at all? Because there are probably some honest people who've used it, and they see it does have a Wikipedia entry. For those of you watching your radios right now, there it is. And at the same time, it's sort of like we're almost getting to something that's not the singularity, but some other dystopian moment when pretty much anything that can be done with tech will be done with tech, and a lot of it's going to be bad, and you're not even going to know what it is. And maybe you can do it or somebody else can do it. And even if you can achieve perfect privacy or something you think is perfect privacy, do you really have it, or don't you? Can you really trust that you do? Is anything like the privacy experience or the experience of agency and autonomy in the physical world possible online? I've always thought it would be in some way. I'm not sure it is. Another angle on this is, well, we've built out a kind of a collective system in which all these things are possible, and maybe now it's time to go back to a drawing board and start over. And in fact, I know some geeks that are doing exactly that. And I'm not one of them, but I'm involved in a project just like that we're, okay, new messaging channel. It's between anybody and anybody. We're going to do this thing over again. And we're not going to use HTTP, for example. We're going to use other protocols. We're going to make this really secure tunnels between people who truly trust each other and nothing else. So all of those things are kind of on the table here.
Well, to answer your question, I mean, the original question, the easy answer, and I mean, the show is about it, right? How do you know that it's a secure app or that it's actually, an app that you can trust? If it's open source, you can look. It can be audited by you, or you could hire somebody to audit the code and make sure that, there's not there's not a T command back there. Sorry if you're not a Linux person, but, that also sends your message to the FBI. So, I mean, open source is the answer to that. And it's a weird position to be in because, I mean, am I telling the criminal syndicates, like, what you need to do is get on board the open source train? Because, I mean, that seems like a hinky thing to do. But if you want your code to be trusted, you need to see it, right? So that's the whole point of open source. I'm so frustrated. And then there's the question of, the FBI, and this is probably going to put me on lists now, but, the FBI has put out an app that claimed privacy and has taken people's private data and stored it. And whether they used it for the purposes of good, blah, blah, blah. I mean, if anybody else wrote that app, they would be violating every privacy law on the planet, right? So it's just messed up. I'm not saying I want all of the criminals to, be free and not get caught by law enforcement. But at the same time, my goodness, breaking every privacy rule and tricking people into using an app, that just seems wrong to me.
Now, just to be clear, this was not we're using this as an example, right? The app itself that they created was not an open source app.
No, it was not. Right. Absolutely.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand because I just heard about this last night on the news. So the app that they created wasn't open source, but what we're saying is, just the thought of it, the thought of creating this and baiting people into using it is not a good idea. And it does speak to, obviously, this is going to get sussed out in an open source project. Someone's going to take a look at this and say, hey, why are you collecting this information? They're going to raise an issue. And you're right, Shawn, it does speak to the nature of open source and why it was even created in the first place, right? I mean, why this concept was created. One of the big reasons is because there's proprietary code, which you can't see and may have these types of implications. Then there's open source code, which if you're really curious, you can go in and not only see, but you can fix these kinds of things ahead of time so that they don't they don't cause problems. So, it just speaks to I am amazed. I'm just amazed at just reading through the article, how many people actually fell for this and how many arrests that they made all on the same day, it looks like.
And I read they were paying like thousands of dollars a month for this. It just blows my mind. I don't know. The bad guys need to hire better tech people is all I'm saying, because wow, that's just poor choices. Yeah.
I think Lex Luthor doesn't really exist. I don't think you get people that are that smart that are doing this kind of thing. I mean,
I'm thinning. There are people give me time. I'm thinning on top.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, of course, you can the famous Russian and Chinese hackers that have done a lot of amazing things, and of course our country, I'm sure, is doing it as well. We try not to get political here, but there are very smart people working in doing wrong things, for sure. But there's just so many better ways to make money doing right things, I would think, that of course, maybe I'm baiting that people are going to respond. I don't know. Let's see. It could be. I don't know. I'm wondering what you guys think. I've really reached the point personally where I'm tired of fighting the fight. I'm great with the open source fight. I'll fight that one forever. That's fine. But rather trying to fix the system that just makes surveillance too easy to do, too easy to rationalize, too easy to combine in different ways. Because that's another thing that happened with this. There are many different surveillance networks that are in the government and other places that could be used, facial recognition and other stuff like that. I helped identify people involved in January 6th in Washington. It's there's just I'm just wondering if there's enough appetite, though, to just say, for a few people anyway, to say, you know what, let's see if we can make another system. Still uses TCP/IP, still runs on the internet. That's fine at the base level. It's kind of like saying gravity still works, but let's build a new civilization on it. Or is it just too easy to stay involved in the world we have?
Yeah, I think that last word, or close to the last word you said, was a big part of it. Is the ease. How easy is it to use, and that's what's going to drive people to use various platforms, and to overlook the privacy implications, right? It's like, well, yeah, they're going to look into all my stuff and send me ads that are, really relevant to me, but it's kind of like spying. But you know what? It's just so easy to use, and it solves a problem that I have. That I'll just give away the privacy concerns. And I think that's part of this is, we had Doc. Maybe you remember. I can't remember the name of the project right now. We talked to on the show a month or two ago about this the identity. Sharing your identity. I forget what it's called. I'd have to look it up. But there are a couple of these projects now that are rethinking identity, privacy, what you share, what you don't. And I'm wondering if that would have helped in a case like this, where I sign up for an app, but because I'm a criminal, I guess in this case, I don't want to defend the criminals, but I would only pick. I only want to share I don't want to share my name. I don't want to share my address, for example. I don't want to share any of that stuff. I only want to share my my avatar or my pseudonym or something like that. And it would restrict the privacy concerns that are the implications that we're talking about.
Yeah, it may have been. I mean, it might go back to Kalia Young, identity woman, who we had on the better part of a year ago. She and Phil Whitley, another guest who's been on the show, and I think Phil's been on the show. Might have been on another show that I do. We organized something called the Internet Identity Workshop, and the whole thing with that is about self-sovereign identity, which is you just do a minimum disclosure on an as-needed basis to trusted other parties, where the verifier is trusted as well in some way. And self-sovereign identity kind of gives it away. About a year ago, we had Devin Lafredo on, and Devin is basically a teacher, and he teaches code to kids, has a brilliant system for doing that. But he's the one who coined the term self-sovereign identity, and he's all about that. And he's one of those people who's basically trying to rebuild the world from the bottom up. Yeah, there's Phil Whitley on the for those watching their radios again. But and they're that's a pretty active development area right now, and it's all over the world. But it's still probably a few years away from being widely deployed. And it's still very kind of enterprisey. I think that the people putting money into it are on the enterprise side, where a lot of stuff's getting worked out, and then it's going to filter out, I think, into everyday use somehow. Some hackers are going to take it and say, okay, I've got this now, and we're going to now make it available for everybody in a way that we all understand and use. Or some vertical use will come up, something in e-commerce that involves wallets and cryptocurrency or something else will get critical mass to start taking off.
I think about something related to this is the way I feel about cryptocurrency, and being able to, especially when you think about ransomware attacks, being able to trace those back and catch those criminals. But at the same time, I want to have a certain degree of privacy over how I use my money from an average person. So do you open up those floodgates and provide the ability with these cryptocurrencies to go after people that are committing these crimes? Because when you do, the flip side is that you also have to give up your own information or some of your own information about who you're paying online as well, or at least the possibility that someone could look into that at some point. Some entity, be it police, government, whatever, could at some point have a warrant and go in and look at that. So, I don't know what the right answer is there, And
you're speaking, so warrants, that just makes me think again, I know I ranted about it a little bit, but I mean, what the FBI did in the case of this app is I can't see how this is anything but illegal. I mean, how would even if they had a warrant to release a trick app, I don't know what that would even mean. I realize I'm getting pixelated here. Sorry about that. But if this is something that the FBI is able to do and allowed to do, what oversight is there for that sort of a thing. I'm really disturbed by it. You know, it's not that I'm not like, hey, bad guys, hire me, I'll help you do it better. It's not that. It's just the idea that the way this was approached just seems so wrong, and this is by the quote unquote good guys. I don't know what the answer there is, but I mean, that doesn't seem to be the focus of these stories. The focus of the stories seems to be, look, they caught the bad guys. Awesome. But then, wow, at what cost, right? I think the quote that I put in the channel here is, you know, who watches the watchers? I mean, it's disturbing.
Well, this is certainly, I don't know how many of these countries, because this was a global thing, right? I don't know how many of these countries have entrapment laws, but certainly in the US, I would assume that a lot of these folks will be arguing entrapment, that this was entrapment, and they can't be held liable for something like this, right? If you provide the means to commit the crime, if law enforcement provides the means, you know, at some point that becomes entrapment.
Yeah, and entrapment, a sting. I'm also looking at what happened with the Colonial Pipeline case, where the Justice Department recovered $2.3 million in Bitcoin that was paid to this criminal group called DarkSide. How do they do that? I mean, that's an interesting question to me. I mean, part of the reason that those guys wanted to be paid in Bitcoin was presumably so they could safely grab it and nobody else would have it. But instead, you know, clearly the feds were equipped and ready to recover that, and are probably ahead of the game on a lot of the way cryptocurrency gets passed around.
I don't know. I read that they just put it in an exchange in the U.S. So all they had to do was just get a warrant or subpoena or whatever the legal word is for them to go in there. I mean, it's really easy to track, you know, where they sent it from to the next stop in the blockchain. And apparently that next stop was a U.S. exchange. I mean, it was just the dumbest thing. I feel like after this show, I'm going to get hit up by a whole bunch of criminal syndicates who are going to offer to hire me to help them be better at technology. I'm not interested. I'm gainfully employed, but...
Yeah. I see here also that Coinbase is saying that they didn't have anything to do with that. So I guess they're the one they're sort of suspected of it because they've got an exchange. But, you know, whenever you have a centralized system of some sort, it's easier to attack as a bigger target, or to enlist for assistance if you're law enforcement. But I find myself wondering, you know, to what extent does Amazon cooperate with AWS or Rackspace or Microsoft or Apple or anybody running a cloud, or that your own stuff that's sitting in an Apple or a Microsoft or a Google or an Amazon cloud is safe from snooping by anybody, you know, but especially for law enforcement, they may, you know, come at those third parties that are in a position to help them find stuff out about you. And I'm mindful of the fact that when the Snowden revelations came out, whenever that was in 2012 or 13, somewhere back there, Linux Journal itself was listed as one of those, you know, I mean, there's a long list of things that the NSA considers suspicious, and Linux Journal was one of them, and their reason for suspecting it was not especially advanced. I mean, it was not... It was like,
I was really worried after that happened. When I got on a plane next, I was worried I was going to be on a list.
Yeah, and you may still be. We may both still be on a list
after
maybe
today.
All of TWiT is on a list. I don't know. You'll have to hit them with your rubber frying pan when they come around. There's a related piece to that, and I see we've probably got about 10, 12 minutes left here. Leon Panetta, speaking of a Fed, he's a former Fed. The short of the story is that he's driving an ancient truck because it has no spyware in it. And if you buy a new car now, it has spyware in it. And there was a piece about how Ford recently got a patent for a system that will look at a billboard and put it on your dashboard, like you're driving down the road. It's not bad enough to be annoyed by a billboard that's on the side of the road, but to put it on your dashboard as well. which Don Marty, who's another ex-Lineage Journal guy, pointed out, said, well, that's so Ford can make free cars for us. They'll make money on advertising. But the truth is, if you have a new car now, it has a cell phone in it. It has data systems in it. It's probably running Linux at some level. And it can spy on you. And it's doing it already in some cases for insurance companies. For Tesla, and in fact is, it's a suction cup on a tentacle of Tesla that's there to help you out and help you be a better driver and all the rest of it. But it's a tether, and we're being, we can be spied on at all times. And Leon Panetta, was expecting a digital Pearl Harbor at some point. And I'm almost wondering whether we're kind of on the threshold of that point in a more general way, where when surveillance is more or less infinitely possible and law enforcement has few limits on what it can do and could certainly rationalize doing anything, if we're at that point. I mean, maybe we're in a kind of a Pearl Harbor of sorts, where there's not necessarily an enemy other than ourselves.
That's pretty scary, Doc.
Yeah, that's
we are our own worst enemy.
I'm here to please.
And I want the fancy new car. I mean, sure, like my wife's car is new enough that it's low jacked, so to speak. It has a cell radio. It has connectivity. I can unlock it and lock it from anywhere in the world. That's scary stuff, man. And I know we see a lot of the stuff on television shows where like, oh, they took over the car and they did all these things. That's not one of the things where TV has gone so far off the rails that it's absurd. It's disturbing how likely that could be without, not as simple as like open my, whatever company sponsored the show's laptop and click 5 keys and then I have full control of the thing. But to do something nefarious, that's scary. And that's a case where, to be honest, even open source software wouldn't necessarily fully protect you, because they could do something to the physical machine, right? I mean, if you have physical access to somebody's car, which is not that difficult, you can do horrible things, even if it is an open source system. In fact, I could see people using the proprietary being better as an argument. They're like, yeah, but if it's proprietary, they won't know what to do. Well, in this three-headed chat, we know that's BS, but man, it's scary how smart and therefore vulnerable our vehicles that we drive around in are. Ugh.
Yeah, my wife has a new, and I'll just say, she has a new Toyota Camry hybrid that has its own cell phone in it, that's busy doing a bunch of stuff. It's got its own nav. It's got all of them have that, and their GPS in it. Although the nav you get from Google is probably better, or from Apple, or from anybody, or Waze. But even there, speaking of that, and this may be related or not, but there was an incident in Los Angeles about a year ago or more, where we're driving down the Pasadena freeway, and there's on Waze, and it says, hey, there's an accident ahead. Get off at Stadium Way, which is by Dodger Stadium. And about 5 cars got off, a caravan, and got routed through city streets, what they call in Los Angeles surface roads, for several miles until we picked up the highway again further down. These are streets nobody knew, nobody would have known, nobody was smart enough to figure these streets out and optimize it. It could only have been Waze optimizing traffic for us, and we're just levers that they're throwing. We're being remotely controlled in a way. I don't have a value statement on that, other than saying it wasn't a bad thing. The experience of it was interesting and good. I'm sure the people on those city streets, that, especially the less traveled ones that got the traffic, weren't happy about it. I had something like that happen when I was in Los Gatos going down Highway 17 toward Santa Cruz, and they routed everybody off and on again. And there were people on the street with signs saying, please stop using Waze or something like that, because they didn't like traffic being routed down their street instead of on the highway.
And sometimes that backfires too. I know I was not too long ago was stuck behind an accident on the freeway, and Google Maps chimed in and said, "Oh, if you go this way, it'll save you 10 minutes." Well, everybody went that way, and the algorithm wasn't good enough to plan out that, oh, if everybody takes this suggestion, then guess what? That's going to be a lot longer. So that ended up being a 20-minute delay, actually, instead of saving me 10 minutes in the end. So it can turn against you, some of these things that are benefits. Also, I think this comes back to, the reason I clicked on that and took that other route was because I trusted Google as a company, and I trusted their technology to get me where I wanted to go, right? And so I think that, and maybe I'm putting my marketing hat on a little bit here, but I think that that's why a lot of this comes down to trust, right? Because a lot of us want these conveniences, and we're willing to sacrifice a little bit of privacy or whatever to get these conveniences in our lives. But I think it's so important now that companies build a trustworthy relationship with their customers and do the right things when it comes to privacy wherever they can, because I think that's going to be a huge differentiator for companies going forward. I know it is for us, the company I work for, Systig. Thank you, Systig, for giving me some time to do this today. Mm-hmm. We're built on open source, and what we're seeing is that a lot of the customers that we're getting, recently, especially after some of the cybersecurity news, are coming to us because they trust open source more than proprietary at this point, and they want a company, even if it's a commercial company selling a product, which we are doing. They want a company that they know is actually built on open source and using that as the base of their product. Because they feel safer and they trust a company more when they can look into some of the code that they're running. And so I think it's a huge differentiator, certainly more than when I grew up. That's not what I looked for, was how much do I trust this company, right? It was what kind of features do they have, what kind of products they offer. But now I think it's much more about who do you trust? You're giving your data to somebody. You're, in some cases, like in the car example, you're putting your life in their hands if you're turning on autopilot in your car. So you really need to trust those companies that you're working with, that they're going to protect your privacy and in some cases protect your well-being.
The good thing too is that, if bad acting does happen, with open source, you at least have reason to have faith that you can hack your way out of it. That you can, and this stuff is in fact fixable. I'm in an old apartment here, an old apartment building in New York, and the light switches are rigor standard light switches. In our house in California, we have 2006 proprietary light switches that cannot be fixed or replaced. So when they crap out, we have to put in something that's standard and not whatever the proprietary thing that was being sold by some company that's now gone and out of business is there. Fortunately, the electrical system is standard. It uses standard wiring, and we could put a kind of a standard switch there or a dimmer or whatever else we might need. But what we're trying to do is replace these things that were, without much consideration at the time, too proprietary for our own good at the time that they went in. Also mindful that, for that matter, technology tends to turn over every few years, and that's true with open source as well as other things, I think. At least open source, you're patching things and you're replacing modules and God knows what else over time. Whereas, in our case, it's like, well, we have to replace these bulbs, and we're using LED bulbs. We had fluorescent bulbs before that. Then kind of those coiled fluorescent ones that were too blue. We got rid of those and we're putting in the LED bulbs. They're supposed to last forever, but they don't. But they all replaced the incandescent bulbs before that, but they still have standard screws. You still screw them in the normal way. And that's a kind of an open sourcey way of approaching things, at least with standard parts. But you want to build a future-proof stuff, and open source is a way to do that. And that may be just a way to loop back, because we're kind of running low on time at this point. Probably the time to go into any final reflections by each of us on whatever we may have concluded or given up in the last hour.
I've decided that I'm going to drive only my classic Beetles, which barely have an electrical system at all. And sorry about this, by the way. Apparently, I'm 8-bit Shawn today. So those of you who are watching on video,
that's what you get for using fiber.
Yeah, my fiber's gone. I don't have fiber anymore. That's the problem. Yeah,
is that
it's
true?
a new job. Yeah, new job. I don't have fiber connection anymore. So.
Oh wow, you look it too, man. I'm sorry. Yeah.
maybe there's a new FBI app out, and everybody's jumping on and using it. It's taking up all your bandwidth.
Yeah,
that's probably true.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I take away from this. Actually, I just think it's important for everyone to be at least knowledgeable about their data, their own data. I mean, being able to use, just be smart about, which companies you're working with, and who you're giving your data to. I mean, it feels like the Wild West, but it really shouldn't be. Everybody should be aware of this, and I don't know. Hopefully, a better educated public will be better able to, figure out what they should, which apps to use and which ones not to use, I guess, when they're committing crimes.
Get smart, criminals.
That's right.
You're going to get job offers now too, Aaron.
Yeah. I think that we're, if we were to try to tie together the pearls and washers and bolts of the last of this hour's conversation, started with education, and I think that's really up in the air. I think where we're going with self-education and formal education it went through a huge change. A big reset button got pushed during the pandemic, and there's a new normal coming along that probably won't be really normal, maybe ever, but certainly not. We're not going to settle back into the same thing, whatever that was, and that's going to be really interesting. But I do think that, it's been almost 30 years since open source became a thing, really became named in 1998. So that's really only 23 years now, and that's not a long time. And I think, but it's here to stay. I think open source and the principles of free software that were behind it, and the L in FLOSS, so Libre, still matters a great deal. We need to be free, and that's a value that's not going to go away either. I think we are all, and the challenge for education also is that, hey, you know what? We are all different, and we are all inventing ourselves, and we are all working to change the world all at once at the same time in ways that only we can. So whoever we are, and then we have to pick the right we's. So I don't know if that strings the pearls or not, but that probably does enough now. I think we're at our hour's point. So just any last words, guys, or plugs before we wrap this thing up? We didn't have a guest to send off, so that routine is out the window.
Just read the article that it should be in the show notes, I think, and I'm clear again, so you can see me in all my glory. Yes, read the article about education, because I brought up a lot of points. I don't know that I had any answers, but a lot of things to think about as you're making those decisions. If you or somebody that you know is getting close to leaving high school, going into the next stage of their life.
And Aaron, any final thoughts?
I'll give a few plugs before we wrap up. So again, thank you to my employer, Sysdig, built on open source. If you're looking for a monitoring software or a security software for Kubernetes environments, clusters, and Prometheus and all those kinds of things, check out Sysdig. I think you'll really like the software. I know I do. That's why I joined the company. And then the other thing I would say is, speaking of open source, I've released some of my code that I use for my channel, my YouTube channel, Retro Hack Shack, to GitHub this week. I've been working on trying to get that stuff uploaded and get all the bits there so that people can go download it or contribute and make things themselves. If they want to use my code, take it, do something with it, great. I just released an episode Monday about rebuilding Ferris Bueller's intercom system. So if you're familiar with Ferris Bueller's Day Off, I took that part of the movie and built Ferris Bueller's doorbell. So you can go press your doorbell and Ferris comes on and says hello and does the whole recorded bit. I don't know, maybe I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. But yeah, so I show you how I did it. If you want, everyone wants to build that project, watch the video and then go download the code, and you should be all set. So take a look at the channel. It's a lot of fun. It's a great hobby.
And in my case, I'm content to plug the show. So that'll be it. So thanks, guys, and thank you everybody for watching and listening. I'm Doc Searls, and we will see you next week on FLOSS Weekly.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. If you would like to check out more about tech news, then you should check out Tech News Weekly with me, Micah Sargent, my co-host Jason Howell, where we interview the people making and breaking the tech news every week.